So I'd like to go on. In this working group of the General Anthroposophical section at the Goetheanum, we will try in these 3 days to give you a certain image of what we are working on at the Goetheanum in this section at the moment. This is part of the presentations of Constanza Kalix and me. And so the first day today, it is trying to clarify, I would say, the image of what Steiner meant with the School for Spiritual Science. I mean, we all have our own images in the meantime, what we made out of it, of this School for Spiritual Science. But I think for the Goetheanum and for all other anthroposophical institutions, it is quite necessary to clarify the picture at all. I mean, the personal interpretations, this is the one thing. And the other is what Steiner had in mind. And I think this is also a need to clarify what is really the original vision. We can change visions and we can adopt them to a given reality, but I think first of all we have to understand them deeper, what was meant to be, what was meant to become. So today, by Constanza Kalix's introduction in the question of schooling path and spiritual development, and my little addition now, this is part of today. Tomorrow, with these 2 units of the working group, we want to come back to a theme we had last year at the Goetheanum in a conference of our section, the dignity of the human being. So this is a general topic today in the world, the dignity of all human beings. But what we understand with the word dignity, what is the value of a human being? And this is a topic for tomorrow. Constanza will talk in general about this challenging question. And then I want to go a little bit to a specific part. We called it in the program the dignity of the human body, but I decided to talk a little bit in my presentation also about the dignity of birth and death, the 2 thresholds in our biographies and all these forces working on these thresholds in our times. This was a conference last year at the Goetheanum in our section, and all these conferences are recorded, so we all prefer to be here in presence, and it's quite different to a Zoom lecture or to an audio, but sometimes it's good to have these records. And so sometimes now at the moment, if we give lectures at the Goetheanum, we always record them, not by live stream, most of them only by little recording machines, and then people can easily find them on the homepage of our section for free. And it's sometimes touching if people then write an email from Odessa out of the war saying we had electricity for 1 hour and could go into the Goetheanum lecture. So we have this opportunity. We all know this is not what is the main intention of Michael, to have Zoom lectures or recorded, but sometimes it's really better than nothing. So tomorrow the question of the dignity of human being, also dignity of birth and death. And the 3rd day a little bit closer to a specific field and also to a specific challenge and also a threat in education, and also education under totalitarianism. I will talk about, in my part, about the Waldorf schools, but not only about the schools in the time of Hitler. I mean, this is far away from us now, but we know that dictatorship or other forms of oppressive states and administration powers, they are close to us. So how anthroposophical institutions can behave and in situations where, yes, there is not much freedom resting. This is a historical question, but also an actual question. We have been to a visit beginning of the year to Israel together also And it was interesting. I gave a lecture about the Waldorf schools in the time of Hitler. This was only about the Waldorf schools to the teachers. I spoke to them, and because most of those who came to the lecture are the families who survived. So father, mother, or grandfather or grandmother escaped from Germany. But I was not aware that they perceived the lecture more or less also to their actual situation in Israel. I mean, this is not at all a Nazi situation, but also the free Waldorf schools ask themselves what will be the outcome in 10 years in Israel if this government with these orthodox forces and so on will be the leading forces for educational affairs in the future. So this is a historical background, but it is also belonging to our present time, as we all know. So these 3 days, a working group out of the general anthroposophical section, and this is the section for anthroposophy at the Goetheanum, maybe to say this again, which is a little bit ridiculous if we think all sections at the Goetheanum are faculties for anthroposophy. But of course, as a faculty for anthroposophy in medicine it has a clear dedication, medicine, and not anthroposophy as itself. So we think that in the general anthroposophical section or section for general anthroposophy, Steiner, he himself, and anthroposophical spiritual science itself should be a theme and is a theme as far as we are able to. And the first class, the 19 class lessons, historically and actually they belong also to the general anthroposophical section, and so this is where we have to handle these spiritual gifts. Now, just to clear a little bit what we are doing in this working group. So when the invitation came, I had the feeling it's good to talk out of one section at the Goetheanum also precisely a little bit, saying what we are doing there. And in the general section, it is more unclear than in all other sections what they are doing there. So this is only just a little overview. Now, my topic now will be in the presentation, and then we will have the conversation about it. I titled it Rudolf Steiner's Expectations on the members of the School for Spiritual Science. And I don't know, and I won't post a question who has a blue card or who is a member here in this group, because I think we can discuss this question also not only in front of the members, because it is also part of this clarifying process. What is the school meant to be, as I said? And from the morning, and also partly from Constanza Karlik's contribution, I want to underline again that in my understanding, Steiner founded an academic institution. The School for Spiritual Science is not only a meditation group, because nowadays we have these tradition lines that not a small numbers of members of the School for Spiritual Science believe or have the inner conviction that it is more or less to be occupied and to work with the mantras of the 19 class lessons. This is the content of the School for Spiritual Science, and the class members are those who are busy with the mantras or make these meditative experiences, which is, of course, very noble striving and necessary, but as far as I can see in Steiner's conception, this is a necessary part for an institution which is much bigger. Steiner called it a School for Spiritual Science, a high school, because as every high school, it has the task to research and to teach and to bring publications to the world and to support practical institutions. So, and therefore he founded faculties, as I mentioned, for medicine, agriculture and others. And the School for Spiritual Science should be the place where there is research in agriculture, teaching in this new understanding of agriculture, and publications, scientific books, results. Because Steiner said you can't open an institution and call it School for Spiritual Science or Freie Hochschule für Geisteswissenschaft if the public has to say where are the results. So you can't pretend to have a scientific institution without scientific results, Steiner said. Because 100 years ago there were also people who had the feeling anthroposophy has merely esoteric tasks, so, and who can prove meditations. But Steiner wanted to have also papers and books and things estimated by the public out of a School for Spiritual Science. So to a certain extent, this school was meant as an institution doing research, teaching and publish and being present in the world. And yeah, Steiner said we must honestly come before the world with things that have in themselves the possibility of standing there scientifically. Scientifically. I mean, not only esoterically, but he said scientifically. We have to show the world that we are productive. They can say whatever they want about anthroposophy, but if the results are there, So Branko Fürst, who is under us, once published a book about the heart and its circulation, about Steiner's conception of the heart function not as a pump only, but a more complex organ. And Steiner's hope was that this conception is in the future proved by medical and other empirical material, so that we can say, okay, this is let's say a spiritual idea, but ideas incarnate. So if this is true, that the heart is no pump, then we can prove it once upon a time. That means if the research is more detailed, we can show it in the sensual world, that these spiritual conceptions belong to our earthly world. So Steiner's idea was really that we bring research down to earth, to the sensual world. I also underline this because in many anthroposophical circles, research is any spiritual investigation. And some people study and they call it research. And I think this is not Dr. Steiner's understanding of research. I mean, we are all students, hopefully, but to be a researcher in the sense of Steiner, this is a kind of a scientific research aspect. And he said methodologically, then we have to come to results. So the School for Spiritual Science with its faculties should come to results. And they will be then in the world. We can say after 100 years, it happened on several fields. I mean, not completely, but we had good scientists in the anthroposophical movement, and they brought good results. If the world accepted all the results is the other questions, but there is material and books and papers were published, they are part of the world. And sometimes it takes time, also with the public media and so on, if it's, those things are not always well received at once. But it's wonderful that they are there. We have it on the level of missile tool research, cardiology research, other research. Also, let's say Goethe, when in Steiner's lifetime, because somebody posed the question about the theory of colors, in Steiner's lifetime, Steiner was one of the only person who believed or who knew that Goethe was a scientist in his approach to the question of colors. This was not just a hobby of a poet who wanted to do other things than poetry. No, he was sure that Goethe, and this is now more or less in the history of science well known, that Goethe's approach to the colors is a scientific, real way. It is not the only way, but it is profound, and it has its position, not in the public media probably, but on the scientific discussion. Goethe is completely different scene than 100 years ago, when Steiner was a pioneer in saying, don't underestimate these men. So it takes time sometimes, but it's good to do this work. And this is part of the School for Spiritual Science in its sections. And in the general anthroposophical section, it is also part to publish about Steiner, he himself. Biography, work development. We need a level of post-Steiner, he himself in the public. I know that the mass media at the moment, they follow other publications. But it's good that they are there, these other books, our own books. Paul Celan, this chief poet, once said, the chance of my poems is their existence. So they are there, the poems. And with some of our own publications in the anthroposophical movement, I would say they are there. We will see what will be the future of culture and science. And so this is maybe one expectation of Rudolf Steiner, that there is work going on. Or let's say another example, in one teachers' conference, there was one question posed by a teacher of the Stuttgart Waldorf School about a specific aspect of understanding human beings, and Steiner gave a hint where the man who posed the question could find something in a lecture of Steiner, and said then, you know, it is all widespread in my lectures, but you should bring it together. This is a little bit strange for somebody who is anew in anthroposophy. So I was anew when I was 21 years old. I was no Waldorf pupil and had no anthroposophical family and background. So when I came across Steiner, I was 21, 22. And but nowadays I would say it was part of Steiner's destiny to give lectures, and sometimes he developed aspects of his insights in a lecture and other aspects in another lecture. And it is very interesting, because sometimes I thought, why don't you give one lecture about, let's say, Mysterium Cordis, so the mystery of the human heart, one lecture, all inclusive. It's not at all there. You have to study in many books and to take it all out. So when I did my medical dissertation as a medical student, I wrote a book about Steiner's concept of physiology, and out of more than 260 books. I can't give the answer if a student would ask me, but why couldn't he give one lecture about the spleen, or I could not really answer, but I see that Steiner's activity of distributing or opening insights was a very special one. It has to do a little bit with his destiny at all, and also with the auditoriums and so on, but the end result is clear. It is widespread in many different contexts. And then he, in this answer to this teacher who asked, he said, you should do this, or one should do it once in the future to bring it all together. And I think this is also one of the challenges of a School for Spiritual Science, or at least of such a section as the General Anthroposophical one, to concentrate on the work of Steiner. And not just to say, okay, it is all the collected works, but they need a kind of, they have to be worked through. And then the teachers, I did it sometimes in my life that I try to bring, to take into account what Steiner said to a certain aspect, let's say the 9th year in education. And it is in many, many lectures when he's talking about the riddle of the 9-year-old boy or girl, or the Rubicon, or how is it called? So the transitional point of this second lifetime period. And then I took them all together, but not only by quotations, but by a certain working through all this, and then seeing, and then also considering, as we heard it from Constanza Kalix, what other big thinkers in the 20th century thought about a 9-year-old boy or girl. So to see that Steiner is not completely alone with his approach. And when I made such, I once did it for the teachers or for the parents as well, a little booklet also in Steiner books about this transitional time of development, the 9-year or 10 years old boys and girls, then the teachers or parents, they were absolutely satisfied, because in a way they had not the time and also sometimes not the overview of bringing it all together. I just wanted to mention it because it's also part of a School for Spiritual Science to do this for the movement. Because the teachers are too busy with their own tasks. I mean, they should study the children and not Steiner's collected works. I mean, sometimes you can say they should do it both, but the reality, I would say it's good if they have the priority in studying the children instead of the books. And insofar, I think it's good if there is a faculty or a high school bringing this material, worked through anthroposophy. And also, as I mentioned, the contextualization, that there are other thinkers in education or in medicine. We can really estimate their contributions to a new anthropology. And also, this is not a task of the practical doctor or the practical teacher to study all philosophers and but the School for Spiritual Science is able to do it with the faculties. And so I wanted to say this is also a kind of supporting the movement, supporting the practical work, and hopefully also one time supporting a better image of Steiner and anthroposophy in the public. At the moment we have difficult times. At the moment it is difficult to come with such publications at all in the public. We call it publications, but the public is hard to reach, and the newspapers don't accept our own papers. So it's not an open space at the moment. But times will change, and we will see. Yeah, this is maybe one aspect, the School for Spiritual Science. But now we have much more members than people who work in this way. And maybe they can say disappointed, oh, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a teacher for spiritual science, I'm not supporting practical institutions beyond some fees, or maybe I'm wrong in the School for Spiritual Science, because I'm in this sense not a scientist. And I think this is a very interesting concept of Dr. Steiner, that people become members of this university or high school without being an active part of this department for research and teaching and practical support, but become members, not only of the society, members of the high school. So belonging to it. It's very interesting because in a way, if I'm becoming a member of the University of Wittenherdecke, where I studied personally, it is not so easy to get a membership. They have also no membership cards, but in fact the so-called members of the university are the students and the teachers. And now, how is it in Dornach or in the School for Spiritual Science? Yes, students. We are all students. And that's very interesting. And it's very wonderful that we all can feel united as students of anthroposophy. And being a student doesn't automatically means being a researcher, even if a lot of anthroposophists today identify those two notions, which I think is misleading. We should, in my estimation, we should a little bit be carefully with the word research. In a scientifically sense, a researcher is doing scientific research. Or in Steiner's sense, he's doing research on spiritual science, which is quite difficult, quite complex, if we really take into consideration what Steiner meant with imagination, inspiration, intuition, and to handle it systematically. Who of us is able to say, yes, I'm the one who is able to handle it in this way? We are students. But this is wonderful to be a student, student of anthroposophy, and being part of the institution, being members of the School for Spiritual Science, expressing that there is a path, and this path is belonging to all of us, even if we never do mistletoe research or research in a closest sense, but being a student of anthroposophy with this esoteric schooling path we heard in the morning or by Constanza Calix. Being a member, that means being a student, to undergo this path to a certain direction, to a certain extension, maybe not coming to the culmination of it, but just try to do. And as Steiner so often said in the class lessons, be a guest and listen. And most of us, including me, they remain guests. I mean guests in the sense of that what is described there in the class lessons, I can't say that this is really part of my own experience in the whole extension. In some aspects I would say yes, but others I am a guest. But a guest doesn't mean somebody who has nothing to do with what is going on. Guests can be quite engaged, can be in connection, but should not forget that there is a difference in between them and what is described. So the over-identification is a problem. It's also a problem of the over-identification with Rudolf Steiner. If we feel a little bit as little Steiners or Steiner and me and so on. I will come a little bit also to the question of Steiner, hopefully, in my presentation, the presence of Steiner also in us. I think there is a reality that we can really experience Rudolf Steiner in many aspects, and I think he's really with anthroposophy and the society, but we are not the same. We are not him. So students means we undergo this process to a certain extent, and sometimes in the class lessons Dr. Steiner said, If one of you has a special relationship or wants to come closer to one of the mantras of these 19 lessons, that's good. So not saying you all have every day to meditate all these mantras, but sometimes, and so it's also an open situation. We are dedicated to this path, but this doesn't mean that we have to fulfill it completely. A lot of people withdraw from the class or never go into because they feel it's too much for them. And I always encourage these people if they come and ask, because I say, yes, it is not necessary to do it all and to feel as elevated. Or so modesty is wonderful, but this is not a counterforce to go in. And just see what will happen if you take it for serious over a certain time. Expectations of Dr. Steiner. First point was the scientific expectation, and I think most of us, Branko is an exception, I would say, most of us, we can say we never fulfilled these expectations of Dr. Steiner. I mean, we are not productive scientists, most of us. So maybe this is a pity for Dr. Steiner if we are members of the School for Spiritual Science but never will publish an important scientific paper. But this is only one aspect of this university, I would say. The second one, I think we all can say yes. I mean, those who want to go into this school and saying, yes, we want to become students, and we are on the way. As good as we can, and it depends on time and biography and so on. Other expectations? Yes, I would say yes, others. There are some others. It's clear that Dr. Steiner had the hope that the Anthroposophical Society will be transformed by the opening of the School for Spiritual Science. This is a very interesting relationship. He said that the Anthroposophical Society, he said it 100 years ago, had a tendency to become superficial. In a way, he wanted to have more seriousness, more profoundness, a spiritual core of the Anthroposophical Society. And this esoteric schooling school, this esoteric institution should be the inner core of the society. Very interesting. And transforming the society. So the relationship between school and society, this is quite interesting. So the society as an outer corpus, I think a public organ, and inside as a heart organ, this schooling path and the school with also the faculties. And on the other side, this school supporting the society. So it's not only one way that we can say it's the task of the society, the anthroposophical, I mean, to support the school. This is financially, economically true, that there would be no Goetheanum at the moment with its sections if the society members would stop their contributions as their fees. So this is the economic aspect. It has also a moral and a social aspect that they wish to have this school for spiritual science with faculties. And even those members who are not part of the school, which is almost 50% as far as I know. But there is another relationship, very interesting, that the school has a positive influence on the society, Dr. Steiner said. In making the society true. I said one of the problems of the society was that they should become more active. Steiner said, and would be more responsible or also more upright to represent anthroposophy in the world, not compromises, but real anthroposophy. Stand for anthroposophy as a society in the outer world. But to stand for needs courage, spiritual courage. But where to get it from? There was one discussion in Schiller's dining room in Weimar, together with Humboldt, about the question, courage is inborn or could be developed. So more or less Humboldt had the position that Schiller is a good example that born courageous. That means courage is inherent, is part of Schiller's soul. And Schiller said, it is a question of developing courage. So he said, no, you can't say the one is born with courage and the other one, unfortunately, is afraid. No, we have to develop the virtue of courage. And I think, and we heard it in the morning, she was sitting here, that this could be one of the elements of the schooling path, inner certainty, inner security. And this means courage to stand for myself or for what I found out as true. And also not the truth in general, but also the true behavior, what I have to do in a certain situation. And only following what I have to say, which is true for me. Not true in general, that everybody should follow this path, but I have to do it. It is my personal answer to my situation. And this understanding of truth, of this understanding of follow your destiny, insofar that every single situation in our lives is a situation where we have to answer. It's kind of a call. What will you do now? And the answer is individual. Individualistic, that means my own answer. I have to answer to a situation. And it is my answer. And nobody can replace me in this situation. And this inner security to stand for myself or to my own perception of the situation. I mean, we had it in the Corona time, in so other times where it's quite difficult to really judge what is true. It is not so easy sometimes, and we follow then maybe certain clear voices. In the Corona time there were quite a polarity in between, and sometimes I have to find out what is really resonating in my own soul, what I have to do. And this inner security to follow your own line has to do with the spiritual development path. There was is one anecdote of an old anthroposophist who brought Steiner, I think, to the railway station, and then said, "Oh, Dr. Steiner, is it possible a personal question to pose?" And he said, "Yeah, please, always." And then he said, "You know, I was training since decades how to obtain higher worlds. I did all exercises and so on, and all other exercises, and I never had an imagination, inspiration, intuition. This is all for nothing." And Steiner, in this anecdote, said, "You know, once upon a time you will stand again in the railway station, and somebody will ask you something, and you will give the right answer. And then it will all be sensible." I mean, this man asking won't ask maybe about the train or the gate, but maybe a deeper biographical question, but just to be able to answer one time in a specific situation. And then the whole schooling path was fruitful. So the aim of the anthroposophical schooling path is not to find a third Jesus or another spiritual achievement, because quite often we try to balance spiritual development on new insights. So if somebody is bringing a new book or a lecture with tremendous insights about karmic stories or new planets or Christ, of course, always an interesting theme. But for Steiner, it was more or less to behave. So the end result, it's not an end result, but a kind of a positive result of inner schooling is the behavior. Or in a more spiritual understanding, to be able to give an answer to situations. And especially also situations which are important for others. To be the neighbor or to be the companion, which is a question of spiritual awakening. Über Geist besinnen. So the second part of the foundation stay in meditation, being present in the time and in the relationship. So back to the theme, expectations of Dr. Steiner for the school is also that the Anthroposophical Society gains an inner heart organ, and then the society will be deepened. But it belongs together. In many countries, I don't know how it is in Canada or in the United States, the class groups, they are a little bit separated from the society groups, which is a little bit strange. So in some countries, in Switzerland, as an example, we have really circles of class members or class holders, and they are a circle for themselves. And in a way, they are maybe in some cities not the active part of the society or the sections, so they have an inner life. And it's so important that in Steiner's conception, they belong together. So it is a task for the class members to transform the society, and a task for the Anthroposophical Society members to support the class and the school. So they belong together. And third point, and then I'll close after the fourth point. The high school or the heart organ and the society, but also where are the limbs? The limbs are the Waldorf schools or the farms or the clinics. And interesting, 100 years ago we had a situation which is still existing, that these institutions, they are more or less independent now from the society and the School for Spiritual Science. Independence resounds positively. I mean, it's good that they are free, but in fact they have lost the connection in many places. And this was a theme 100 years ago that Steiner said, you know, the Waldorf teachers, they were so good anthroposophists, they were so active members of the society, and then they founded their Waldorf school, and since then they are hidden in their school. They don't come anymore to our society gatherings. Of course, they have no more time. But he said it's an illusion. It is an illusion for the middle term to think that you are able to run a Waldorf school without a real relationship to anthroposophy and the society. To anthroposophy, maybe this we can understand. To the society, maybe we think, yeah, but you don't need an anthroposophical society for a Waldorf school. But in Steiner's vision, the society is the basement, is the social association needed for all practical institutions, also very helpful. The society could be the ground, I mean the society based on anthroposophy, but the society as a network of a lot of human beings who want to help anthroposophical impulses coming into the world. So an incarnation support. And of course, such a society would be very helpful for every Waldorf school. They can collect money, but not only money. collecting forces, that the school can be productive. And in fact, he said to the Waldorf teacher, if you now lose the connection to the society, this will be of harm for your school. You will see it. So now we have this development since long time that we have not only many Waldorf schools without any connection to the anthroposophical society or the School for Spiritual Science. Of course, there are some teachers, most of the schools have some teachers who are still members of the society or even the School for Spiritual Science, but this is a minority in most cases. And it's interesting to hear that after the Christmas conference, the Stuttgart Waldorf Collegium, they asked Dr. Steiner, we would like to connect our school with this new development in Dornach. Can't we be an institution of this new Goetheanum? How can we link? And Steiner said it wouldn't be good to link your school directly to the Goetheanum. It's also not good for the local authorities. They should know that you are an independent school. But what you could do is that all the teachers become members of the School for Spiritual Science. This would be a positive step. And then I could work with you as class members together for the development of your school. And they all went in. And he also said, you know, you can become a member of the School for Spiritual Science for your personal belonging or your personal wishes, but also there is also a membership by professional reasons. That means if I'm a Waldorf teacher, I'm standing for the Waldorf school in front of the children, in front of the parents, in front of the local authorities. That means I represent anthroposophy. And this means this has to do with the membership of the School for Spiritual Science, to represent anthroposophy, not only to be interested in or to consume it, but to say, no, I stand for it. So I take a responsibility. And it's interesting that the whole staff of the first Waldorf school, they were all members of the School for Spiritual Science and understood themselves as representatives. And the same is true for all the priests of the Christian community, and for all the anthroposophical doctors of the young doctors group, Jungmediziner. As groups, they went into the School for Spiritual Science, individual, but also part of their professional task. And we see, without a tendency to say it was all better in the past, but they had other problems in the past. But we can see that this is a force. I mean, if such a staff, if such a group is saying, yes, that's what we want, this has an influence. And so this is indeed a very important element, that the so-called anthroposophical movement, that means all what comes out of anthroposophy, and this is a lot in the 100 years. I think we underestimate the success of anthroposophy in 100 years. Sometimes we are very critical, or we see we expected 300 people here and less came, and quite often we have the same experience. We are little groups and bad selling rates of books at the moment. And so it's, in a way, sometimes I have the feeling it's going like this. And this is partly true, but also true is that anthroposophy is really widely distributed in the world. And Steiner once said, you know, anthroposophy, you can't stop here anymore. I mean, you can close all Waldorf schools, you can close all medical clinics, you can close and so the last few years I thought, yeah, this will maybe come. They will say this is not according to the law, or they are not following the rules, or you can close the anthroposophical institutions. This is easily, and in all dictatorships it happened. But you can't close anthroposophy anymore. In a way, this is there. You can also try to eliminate all books by Steiner in all the translations, which is much more difficult. but still then it is there. Anthroposophy is in the world, and the anthroposophical movement is in the world. Now, the interesting question is, sometimes we can have confidence in the future because we say we have widespread anthroposophy. But we also see that some of it is an instrumentalization of anthroposophy. They just take out, let's say, BD. It is now really a world movement, biologic dynamic, but you can also copy BD and do what they do without being an anthroposophist. And the strange thing is that it works, partly at least. And I will tell you over next day on Sunday a little bit how the Nazis copied anthroposophy. I mean, not anthroposophy, but BD components or educational components. So there is a certain risk that that anthroposophy, that the source is separated from the practical thing. And this is also one aspect of the Christmas conference. This should not happen. Or if it happened already, we have to change the situation. Steiner said we need to immerse, to transform. We should also embrace, not all anthroposophical initiatives in the world, embracing in the sense of inviting also. Now we have the Michaelmas conference at the Goetheanum. This is an initiative to invite a lot of people working for anthroposophy, out of anthroposophy, but most of them, or at least not a small group, is not a member of the society, not a member of the School for Spirit and Science. And maybe if they would be asked, by, not only by the policemen, but by other, if they are anthroposophists, they would say no. But in a way, we can blame it, but if we discuss and talk with people, they have their reasons. Some of them were shocked by anthroposophical group behavior. Others were shocked by Steiner hat gesagt, by too many quotations. They feel uncomfortable as being regarded as an anthroposophist, which is also a strange world. I mean, we are human beings and not anthroposophists. So it's not so easy to say I'm an anthroposophist. I mean, some of us don't feel well. Is this an identification to be an anthroposophist? I mean, some of them, they have their reasons to say no. I don't want to be part of this group. But what Steiner brought is very important. So let's say the president of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1961, he was the only one who gave a big lecture in Jerusalem about who was Steiner to the 100th anniversary. Hugo Bergmann was his name, a Jew from Prague, a student of Steiner, was reading a lot of anthroposophy, also correspondence with Steiner, but he always said, I'm not an anthroposophist. But this is really important, what this man brought. Now, back to the Michaelmas conference, we invite them. Unfortunately, not Hugo Bergmann is in another sphere of heaven, but the other ones, the Bergmans of today, are not so many, but anyway, we invite them instead of blaming them. You should confess that you are an anthroposophist. No, but how to embrace, in a way, how to invite, how to foster a support, a feeling of belonging together. Also on a destiny level. Not saying we are the Michaels group, but in a way, maybe we have something in between us and we should work closer together. And this is a conference end of September where we also try to come to agreements or to certain concrete ideas what should be the next step. So we have a working group in the general section and we invite all the leaders of anthroposophical seminars and all the leaders of anthroposophical publishing houses. And the idea of the little group is, or big group, is to bring them closer together, because we think deepening anthroposophy in such a seminar requires books. And the publishing houses, they should be a partner for these seminars, maybe for cheaper books, but it's good for a publisher to know that books are needed. And it's good for the seminar leaders to know that publishers are needed. So we try to bring them together. Some of them only by Zoom, others will be there in presence. And the idea of the group is that maybe we have a plan what to do the next 3 years, instead of only saying, oh, it's going like this. Okay, but what we do now? What will we do now with this development? So this was my third point. I mean, the first one was science in itself. The second point was being a student as a member of the School for Spiritual Science. And this is wonderful. I think this self-estimation of being a student. So I'm a student of anthroposophy, and not only in the collected works, but also in my collected soul forces. And third point, the School for Spiritual Science, the expectations to bring together anthroposophical society, anthroposophical movement, initiatives in the world, and the school, the uniting element. There are many other expectations, and I want to finish now with the last word about the hierarchies. Because in a way, I mentioned it in my morning presentation, we feel, I think all of us, me included, sometimes we feel overburdened. And if we hear such wonderful visions of Steiner, it has a double effect. The one effect is enthusiasm and fire, and the second is depression. The second is sometimes after the lecture or next morning or in the night, because the question, who I am. So wonderful with this vision, maybe also good presentation, and myself, where I am on what can I do. So at the end, we feel overloaded, and then I would say it is good to find a new relationship to what Dr. Steiner called an ideal. Something which is the direction, something which should be done, a kind of a leading path, but not as a utopia or not as an illusion, but that we, in a way, reinforce these ideas. I mean, ideals are will-imbued. Ideals are will-imbued ideas. That means I want to bring the reality in this direction. It has a will aspect. And yeah, that the good may become. This is an ideal. But also it's the way to incarnate it. And the interesting thing is that Dr. Steiner said our relationship to the angels it's quite strong with the children. They have the relationship to the angels, to the angeloi. But the adults, they need to build this relationship. And interesting that Steiner said it has to do with the capacity of developing ideals. It's very interesting that the angeloi, the angels, they can't be with human beings to the extent which is needed if the human beings lose their capacity of developing ideals. It's very interesting that we need this support from the hierarchies, and this is the lowest hierarchy, but we have to, we heard about the conditions. I mean, this is one of the conditions of these relationships. And the interesting thing is that they support us in a way, and sometimes we can feel it. Maybe we don't identify the gaze, the warming look of the angel. Steiner describing it, that we can experience sometimes, if we are on the right path, the mild and warming look of the angels. If they see that we are developing ideals and following them. But I think even if we can't see the angels and sometimes don't realize this is an angel connection, I think we all know this if we follow an ideal or trying to incarnate it. And sometimes it's just a conference or something which is really not our personal, that we'll buy a new car and should be a Porsche car now, but on another level, that there is support. But not only positive, Steiner said, we can also feel the burning reproach of the angels if we lose these ideals. If we go away, and I said we should really trying to feel real to these ideals. So the School of Spiritual Science, for spiritual, is an ideal. That's what I wanted to say. It is clear that we are not the ones who lead this school, but if we pretend that the opposite is true, that we are not at all those, then I think we should try to feel this reproach. And there is a certain seduction of distance from Steiner, from anthroposophy, because it's too much. A certain seduction that anthroposophists distance themselves, because in a way they feel overburdened and they become critical. Critical against Steiner, critical against the society, critical, because in a way they don't feel the capacity to realize it, and they are looking for the mistake, but not in themselves, but in anthroposophy itself. And this is a seduction, but I would say the angeloi relationship. It's also interesting that the angeloi guide human beings after death. And now we are all not 20 years old. That means with these ideals we will go in 20 years, in 30 years, but certainly we will go. And it's so important that after death we keep these ideals of the School for Spiritual Science in this case, and then angeloi can take it over and also help. They will help us to find the other co-workers of Michael on this task, because the School for Spiritual Science is not for the 20th century only. Steiner also said it is a redemption for the angeloi itself, because the angeloi, the angels, they really suffered when Christ left the sun and incarnated on earth and remained there, more or less. They suffered. And Steiner said the only redemption for the angel is that they see the Christ impulse is living in the human souls. This is a kind of redemption for the angels. And I want to include it here because I think, the so-called School for Spiritual Science belongs to a healing activity for the world. And if we try to work for it wherever we are, we need the support, but on the other side, we are also supportive even for the angels. And Steiner, last remark, will be with us. I mean, it is not easy to discuss about the theme. Where do we experience Rudolf Steiner? But when I met anthroposophy, as I mentioned quite late in my biography, and I was reading him books, it was as a communication with the author. I think Steiner is related to the writings. When I follow the lectures, I can't hear the voice, the Austrian voice, but it is a personal wording, absolutely. or let's say the esoteric lessons of Steiner. I mean, he's so present. The glass lessons, if I give the glass sometimes as a glass holder, it is an incredible inner experience also for the relationship to Rudolf Steiner. I mean, without any hero aspect, it is no icon. And for me, there is no need for a photograph of Rudolf Steiner here. But the reality of his accompanying people, this is so, for me, so clear to experience that it's difficult to talk about. So the reality of his presence in these anthroposophical strivings, this is for me so dense that I have problems to discuss it or to describe it. But I just want to support those opinions that he's still deeply interested. And for me, this is also clear because it was his mission to bring this anthroposophy in a time of, in a genocidal 20th century, in a time of abyss. He had to bring it. And he had to open the School for Spiritual Science and the faculties. This is the Michael movement. And of course, he is interested in all human beings, all souls who are doing something for it. And it can be really a Waldorfschule initiative under really difficult conditions in Africa. He's so interested as his being. I mean, and I think we are not in Africa, but if we go into the meditative act or hear the foundation stone meditation, I think he is there as a spiritual entity, not as the person he was from Vienna, born in 1861, but the signature of his individuality, I think, is present. So it was a little bit longer than intended, as always. And the rain is now coming, ending. We make just 2 minutes of silence, not meditation, but just that silence is there. And then it would be good to discuss some of the aspects. And I come then a little bit closer also.